Michail Antonio is injured again. I was going to say it's typical West Ham, but let me be absolutely fair here. We've done okay. With injuries this season, we've not done too badly. I just think it's sort of got to a point where a lot of them are hitting home now, aren't they? And particularly looking at Zuma, so obviously missed a couple of games, and you're starting to look Sufal, took out a little knock as well. We've had little incidents where other people have had injuries, and of course we had a little knock to Jarrod Bowen and when he was on international duty training with England, and then we had the big knock. Well, I say it's not a knock, can't call it a knee injury a knock really, can you? And that was obviously to Michail Antonio, who is on international duty with Jamaica. I think we've done okay, but I don't think it's any surprise that they're starting to take their toll now, because we've run the squad ragged, haven't we, really? We make, I think they said in their stat, I think it was during one of the recent games, the stat popped up, we've used the least outfield players of any other Premier League team. So at some point, we were going to encounter a certain run of bad luck. I think the bad thing with Antonio is that we were relying on him in this January. I've no doubt about that. Part of the planning for West Ham in this January window with Mohammed Kudus leaving was Antonio coming back. And he was due to come back against Bristol City. I guess the plan would have been for Jarrod Bowen to move to the right wing. And do you know what? I think if Lucas Paquetá is back in the midfield, then things are okay at that point. We can probably muddle through. Are things ideal on the left wing? No, not really. Not with Said Benrahma playing there, I think it has to be said, or Pablo Fornals. But I think you'd muddle through. With Bowen on the right, with Antonio up front, and with Paquetá sat behind, I think you do okay. We get some shots, we get some corners. Bowen might score, Antonio might score. Less likely, obviously. We get some corners. Someone, Ward-Prowse, pops it in. It's okay. I think the moment you lose Antonio, the whole plan falls apart. It absolutely does, because what it means is Bowen's going to end up playing up front, and we will see what we saw against Brighton. Now, don't get me wrong, it was a good draw, and at the time, good draw, right? And I thought at the end of the season, that won't look too bad. But the creativity in the team was negligible. Even if you bring Paquetá back, we are completely ineffective in wide areas. I said in the preview that I did ahead of the Bristol City game with Gio that perhaps one of the choices I'd probably make in there would be to find someone else to play at left back, possibly even Ben Johnson. If Sufal's available at right back, play Ben Johnson left back, just to push Emerson forward on the left wing. And part of my thinking on that was just creativity, because we're screaming out for it. He's got a direct run in, he's a little bit faster than the other two, he's got a good delivery, he's do you know what? I reckon if you saw him in training, I don't think there'd be much difference in dribbling between Said Benrahma and Emerson. But Said Benrahma's confidence is shot. And so I just don't. I think he's stopped actually taking on his man. Emerson does, and he does it quite effectively. But that's far from an ideal situation. Well, we can't continue with this sort of patchwork quilt until the end of the African Cup of Nations. What are we looking at now? So we're looking at the 6th of January now. It's not even like we're into a bit of January and we've already got some of the African Cup of Nations out of the way. Far from it. Ghana don't even play their first game until the 14th. There's a lot of African Cup of Nations left to go. Now, I want to cast your mind back to what David Moyes has said in quite a few recent interviews, which really, the West Ham aren't going to be looking for a striker in this window. Now, part of that may be smoke and mirrors. Part of that may be to throw journalists off the scent and sort of mask our real target. Maybe that's the case. If that's the case, fair enough. Don't blame him for doing so at all. But I don't know why I believe him, and I don't always believe David Moyes when he speaks in the press conference. When he turns around, he says, "You know what? I think we're going to sort of explore more of Jarrod Bowen playing there." Well, if we get that, then Jarrod Bowen does not play on the right at all. And I would suggest that what's got to happen is West Ham are going to have to make signings in this window. Now, I'm not going to suggest that there's a massive urgency on the Bristol City game. We should have enough to get past them. You'd hope so anyway. But we are going to start to encounter a few problems once we get back into the swing of things in the Premier League. Because I just don't think we're okay. We're not in any sort of peril in the Premier League at all. But in order to keep up that push for 6th place, for 7th place, whatever. Gio did a video earlier on in the season saying that depending on the sort of coefficient, European places could go down to 8th place. If we're going to contest that, the squad ain't good enough at the moment. And you know what? It's been a case of, well, the squad ain't good enough, full stop. What is good enough is the team. But I think the moment you take Kudus out of that team, the moment you start taking Jarrod Bowen and moving him out of position, and then you start to lose other players, you start to lose Kurt Zouma, for instance, Nathan Gerd, irrespective of everything, he's good, bad or indifferent, you start to get a patchwork team. We're now relying on the squad. I was going to say Moyes has got to do something now, but Steidten's got to do something. And what has got to happen is this cautious approach, which has been the case in a lot of other transfer windows. This can't be allowed to continue. What I don't want to do is, look, do you remember that time when we were sort of pushing for the top and we didn't sort of reinforce? It was the Europa League season when we eventually went out to Frankfurt. That January there was a real opportunity for us to strengthen. David Moyes even admitted that there were funds. We know there's funds there. We've already got one body out. The Kieran Maguire has already been on this channel and said there's funds there for transfers in this window. If you've just got to do the calculations yourself. Look at what we sold in Skamaka, Declan Rice, Vlasic, Masuaku. Look at what we spent. There's money there. We know there's money there, right? We've also got an overdraft facility. There's no reason not to bring players in. But this is the folly of just having a sort of first team with maybe one backup and relying on Michail Antonio, who's look, traditionally, he is an injury-prone player. Yes, he's been okay for the last 2 or 3 years. However, he's an injury-prone player that's just had a knee injury. Relying on his recuperation to get us through January, which clearly was the plan, was silly. And it's already failed. Listen, I was hearing all the talk, and I dismiss it. I really do. All this talk about you can't buy any players in January. 3 names here: Thomas Souček, Jarrod Bowen, Jesse Lingard. Absolute nonsense. And you know what? 2 of those were loans. Thomas Souček and Jesse Lingard were loans. I don't really care what it is, but if we cannot be in a situation where we are relying on Pablo Fornals, Said Benrahma, and let's chuck Danny Ings in there as well. Because make no mistake about it, Danny Ings will be part of the solution if Jarrod Bowen has got to continue to play on the right or whatever. Because if Jarrod Bowen plays on the right, I'll tell you now, it's going to be Danny Ings that plays up front. Let's be fair. I would like to think Benrahma gets a little bit of a chance, but he's not been brilliant since he's played and got his chance. I don't overly think it's his fault. Because I think he's playing in that team that was creating nothing against Brighton is not great. But we need a senior striker. When I say a senior striker, I don't even necessarily mean someone that's 30. The age profile of our team is not great. We just need somebody good who can hit the ground running. Somebody that's a decent player. I don't even care if they're a decent 21-year-old, 22-year-old. A decent player that can hit the ground running. Maybe someone like Kudus, maybe someone like Bowen, someone that can play on the left wing, play as a striker. So at least when this little mini injury crisis finished, when Kudus is back, then maybe we've got the option there of a left winger. I mentioned him the other day. I wasn't thrilled with that Ekatike. I honestly looked at the 1 goal this season and then looked at the, whatever it was, 4 goals in 38 appearances for Paris Saint-Germain, and I initially thought it was a typo. I'd started to search other websites just to think, well, hold on a second, this can't be right. Why would we pay £30 million for this player? But I guess at the moment, we've got to take what we can. And if I don't mean, I'm not saying go and buy anyone. I'm really not. But Michail Antonio being injured is a problem. And that's what it says. I mean, look at the reports there in the Telegraph, there in the Daily Mail. It's sort of Sky Sports News have just run it as well. Everyone seems to agree. He's out for January. That was, in many respects, look, Michail Antonio had lost his place in the West Ham team. Already, before he got injured, he'd lost his place. You could argue the only time we desperately really needed Michail Antonio this season was in January. And if he's not available for that, what's the point? They need to go and get someone else in.